Just a heads up, today's episode might be difficult for some of you because today we're going to be talking about death a little bit, and particularly the afterlife, which I absolutely know that for some people can be quite hard to talk about. So if you're uncomfortable with this topic, feel free to skip today's episode. Go back to listen to some of our other episodes or listen to our other show, The Pact and Boon. But most of all, just have a great day. For the rest of you, in a game where gods exist and spellcasters lay down magical fire with divine energy, death is very real and very present for some of our characters. But what about what happens after death? In my homebrew world, I've tried to think about the afterlife and make it a fully fleshed out concept, but frankly, I think it kind of falls short. So today, let's talk about the afterlife in your D&D games and how to make it fully fleshed out. Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM. This is the show to help you become the world's greatest dungeon master without destroying everything else that you do in your life. I'm your host, Justin Lewis, and we've been doing this show for about 180 plus episodes now, 3 years, talking about all sorts of topics, interviewing amazing guests such as critically acclaimed authors, blacksmiths, improv actors, voice actors, and influencers. And it's all to help you become the very best. So today we're going to talk about the afterlife. And first of all, you might be wondering, why should I even care about the afterlife? Well, there's a couple reasons. There's one that is intrinsically connected to how we play with our characters, right? As a player, how the players play. But then there's more reasons, I guess the second category of reasons, that connects to the narrative and the world building of it all. So go back to episode 109, where I talk about death in D&D and how you need to, as a dungeon master, decide whether death is going to be something that you allow in your campaign, something that you and your players allow, and how it's handled. But more importantly, if you can come back from death. That's one of the major questions in dealing with death in D&D is it actually permanent? Is it something that you can come back from? Is it something that you can be resurrected from, revivified from? Both of those are spells. Reincarnated, I guess, is another spell. So go back and listen to episode 109 to kind of get some context around this idea. But for a lot of us, reincarnation, revivification, and resurrection are welcome. They are things that you want to allow in your campaign. You don't want death to be quite as permanent, especially for some of our characters who, frankly, we seem to treat better than ourselves sometimes. I'm looking at you. You know who you are. You need to treat yourself better. You need to love yourself. But because that is a possibility for most of us, right? Resurrection, coming back from death. Well, if you're coming back, where did you go? So you need to answer that question. Where does, or what goes, and where does whatever leaves go? For most of us, it's going to be the soul. That's what departs the body and goes somewhere else, your spirit. And you got to figure out where that somewhere else is, because when they come back to life, if they do, are they going to have their memories of that place? I guess a simple way to do it is no, they don't remember anything, so you're free and clear. But from a narrative perspective, especially if any of these characters are pious individuals, those who worship and follow some sort of deity, it can be a rich area for some role-playing and for some exposition, specifically about the gods. So that's why I think from a player's perspective, you should absolutely have some sort of afterlife concept fleshed out. It doesn't necessarily need to be perfect, but if characters die, they need to understand what happens to their spirit. From a world-building perspective, you need to understand that most worlds have religions, and for most religions, the afterlife is a very motivating aspect of the religion. for a lot of us who are religious in our current world, our actual world, reality, I guess that's the term for it. For a lot of us who are religious, thinking about kind of eternal consequences, that's one of the reasons why we do what we do, because we want to become something eternally, or because we want to measure up, have some sort of reward, or avoid some sort of punishment. It motivates people because of their belief. And also because of that, it stirs emotion with people. And people often act out of emotion. So if you have this large religion and it's claiming that when people die, they are covered in butter and twice baked in an oven, then frankly, people are going to act a certain way because of that somewhat outlandish claim. Now, if any of you believe that we are covered in butter and twice baked in an oven when we die, I hope I don't offend you. Not just that, but it does impact nations and cultures because it impacts how people feel. It impacts their emotions. It all comes down to how individuals think and what motivates them. And the afterlife, because death is an inevitability, the afterlife motivates people a lot, depending on the person. Some people, it might be kind of counter motivation. They might rebel against the idea. But having that idea allows you to paint the world in a much more perfect way. So let's get into some questions. Today's going to be kind of a quick episode. Let's get into some questions about how to flesh out the afterlife a little bit more. First thing you need to decide, obviously, is there an afterlife? This question will go somewhat hand in hand with the question of, can my players resurrect their characters if their characters die? If there's no afterlife, then obviously, no, they can't. They can't resurrect their characters because once they're dead, they're dead. Now, if there are deities, if there are gods, you have to come up with some sort of, I guess, justification for why gods exist outside of this cycle of life and the characters do not. That could be a very interesting way to play, but you have to come up with the reasons why that is or isn't. So, assuming that there is some sort of afterlife in your homebrew world or your game, now, question number 2 is, how many types of afterlives are there? And what I mean by that is, in the common Judeo-Christian understanding of the afterlife, theoretically, in simplest forms, and in most cases this is pretty common in religions, but there is a good place and there's a bad place, right? Actually, if you've seen the show The Good Place, this is an excellent show to watch if you're interested in this topic, because it does kind of play around with the ideas of these places, right? There's the good place, there's the bad place, and then, spoiler alert, there's actually the middle place. But how many types are there? How many types of good places are there? How many types of bad places are there? In D&D, commonly there's the abyss, which is where demons are, and then there's the 9 hells, which are where the devils are, and there's limbo, and there's all sorts of planes where theoretically someone could go, depending on whether they were true to their values, or if they rejected their values, or if they're being punished, if they're being rewarded. Honestly, you don't even have to make up a new place. You could just pick one of the planes and have people go there. You obviously have good taste. I mean, you listen to How to Be a Better DM, after all. We thank you so much for your support. And if you've ever gotten anything useful from How to Be a Better DM, take a minute and rate us and review us on your podcast listening app of choice. It goes a very long way to helping our show help many more dungeon masters out there who are just like you. If you love our content, help others become better dungeon masters too. You work 8 hours a day. You spend time with your family, and when you come home, you do work around the house. And it seems that you never have as much time as you would like to prepare for your D&D sessions. Does this sound like you? Wouldn't it be amazing to have endless material prepared for your D&D sessions anyways. That's where Roll and Play Press comes in. Roll and Play Press provides D&D 5e compatible material for any type of session. Running a one-shot? Check out their One-Shot Wonders book with over 100 one-shot ideas. Getting started with a new sci-fi campaign? Get their Game Master's Sci-Fi Toolkit to have your games much more prepared with much less effort. Why reinvent the wheel? Check out Roll and Play Press at rollandplaypress.com, see what they have to offer, and get a 10% discount when you buy something by using the code BETTERDM10, that's BETTERDM10 at checkout. Give yourself just a little bit extra help so that you can continue being the world's greatest dungeon master. Spoiler alert, we are building an army. That's right, we're building an army of amazing dungeon masters who want to make the world of D&D a better place. If you want to join our army and fight by our side against the evil forces of boredom and bad DMing, join our Discord and lend your voice to the cause. Go to sessionzerostudios.com/Discord and join for free today. That's sessionzerostudios.com/Discord and enlist in the fight against boredom. But along this same question, with all the different gods that may or may not be in your pantheon, who rules over whichever places there are? If there are 7 gods, are there 7 places that you can go? Are there 8 places, one without God? Do the gods rule over these afterlives? Is it similar to Valhalla, where all the gods are present in this sort of endless war where you can join in the fight and be merry and have this feast and things like that? Or are there divine domains that people can get picked up and chosen to and sent to if they're good, right? If you have different gods of different domains, god of the sea, god of the sky, and you follow one over the other, how is that going to impact where you end up? And are there negative places, and what constitutes you going there? What determines whether you go to the 9 hells, for example, versus Elysium or Celestia? Once you figure out what kinds of places exist and what determines where you get sent, the next thing you need to ask is, what is it like in any of these afterlives? Some sort of description for what a soul would experience in this afterlife. So for an example, in my I'm playing as a player in a campaign run by Caden Otley. He's one of the hosts on the show. And I have a character who is named Votir, and he is a Way of Monk, or a Way of Monk. He is a Way of Mercy monk. And I came up with this backstory where he's part of this order called the Order of the Painted Moon. And they follow a goddess named Oriyun, who was essentially just a super wise lady in life. She was wise, honest, honorable, very beautiful. And people came from all over to kind of seek out her wisdom. And she was wealthy, but she gave of her wealth freely. And she was just kind of like this perfect being, but very much mortal. And one night, a person broke into her house and was trying to steal things from her. She woke up and she saw him, and he ended up, killing her. He performed acts of violence on her. And right after she dies, she essentially ascends to godhood and then returns in vengeance and destroys the man, claiming that, in her final moments, she experienced fear, right? She experienced fear of powerlessness and understood the violence of life. And so she ended up writing this text and gave it to her servants in the building there where she lived, in her kind of manor house. And this text detailed how they should act. And she called them to service. She explained to them that they needed to be those who would prevent suffering from other people by doling out justice. And she created the Order of the Painted Moon from this text. And essentially what the Order of the Painted Moon, they're very black and white. If you are violent, then we will kill you, right? That's and you might be seeing some contradictions there, for sure. Like they themselves believe that they are somewhat damned, right? They believe that they're sort of chosen to do this particular mission because in the text, Orion describes the afterlife. And she says that it's this paradisical state where everything is wonderful, everyone is at peace, and you can sort of like live the perfect life. And those who are violent do not get to have this this lifestyle. But also, mortal life is very important because it helps you get there. You have to sort of develop yourself a certain way. And when like violence is what stops you from having this life that Orion describes. So she calls her followers, or at least the members of the Order of the Painted Moon, to stop those who are causing violence with violence and, in effect, condemn themselves to a subpar lifestyle where in the paradise they won't be enjoying the perfect life. Instead, they'll sort of be there, but they'll be servants of those who have made it there. And she asks them to do this as sort of service to her and service to the people of the world. Now, it's not a perfect religion, of course, but the idea is in this religion, they understand what paradise is like. And they understand that they're trying to help other people get there. And by doing so, they're stopping certain people from perpetrating these heinous acts. So the afterlife is what is motivating them to act a certain way because they know what it's like there. They know what to, not necessarily what perfectly to expect, but they have an understanding that motivates them. So when you create your afterlives, you need to determine how much do people know and how much does it motivate them. Now, actually, you need to determine how much do people know. That's actually one of the next questions to ask is, do people know about the afterlife? Is it a sure thing? Is it something that's been written in text, or is it some sort of verbal tradition? Do people recount stories of the afterlife every year on a certain day at the campfire, or is it in a sacred scroll? And even more, and this is actually question number 5, is the afterlife permanent? Like, does it take you from one afterlife to a different type and continue your progression? Is it reincarnation? Is that what the afterlife is? You just come back and you live in this life as a different personage? Could you be resurrected? And if so, how many memories do you remember? Has anyone come back before? With all these questions, you can paint a very compelling picture of not just a particular religion or an individual, but the world. So let me give you an example. And I'm sort of letting you into my homebrew world here because obviously I've been working on this for quite some time. Those of you who, if you've been following the podcast for any number of years, you've heard of me talk about integrity. But I have this homebrew world that I'm working on. It's called Integrity. And the pantheon that I've been working on has actually gone through a few iterations, a few drafts, you could say. In its current state, the actual pantheon, the one that actually exists, is unknown to the world. Instead, there are estimates of like 27 gods and goddesses up to 120, right? Just all over the world. And the idea for the afterlife that I've been toying around with is that each god sort of claims you, and they each have their own sort of paradise. If when you die you haven't been claimed, you sort of end up in this no man's land, despair, wasteland type place, fighting monsters and things. This could be somewhat analogous to the Shadowfell, right? I'm thinking monsters like the Sorrowsworn or things like that, just kind of wandering these wastes, and you have a real chance of becoming one of these monsters or falling prey to them. And when you die in this waste, you just resurrect in the waste in a separate place, and you sort of start all over again. And the idea is that you live in this waste long enough to prove yourself to one of the gods and goddesses and get them to claim you. And I'm still toying around with that idea and wondering whether or not it's a good idea. For the world integrity, I think a big part I want to focus on is the confusion and how much is unknown, how much people don't actually know about what is, what they don't know about the gods and goddesses. And because of that, I wanted to highlight the conflicting descriptions of paradise. And I think I like the idea, but I'm wondering where it might fall short. I think the biggest weakness of this idea that I have is it might not be motivating enough. People, I mean, we know in our own culture, in our own world, that people who seem to have to prove themselves over time, that trend in religion kind of dissipates, and it's become a lot more mercy driven rather than damnation and hellfire. But I guess that doesn't necessarily need to be the case in my world. Anyways, I have a lot to think about with my own homebrew world, and honestly, if you have any ideas, I'd love to hear them, so reach out to me. But with your world, with your game that you're playing, with your afterlives, what kind of afterlife will you create in your game? Death is, well, it's ever present. And if it's not present in your life, just wait. Some point, someone in your life will move on. And for you who might be suffering right now from a recent loss, I wish I could reach out and give you the world's biggest hug. And that's coming from someone who's not even a hugger, so you should feel pretty good. But I also know that that doesn't necessarily make it any better. And that's one reason why the afterlife can be such a powerful thought, is because death for us is such a permanent thing. And in your game, you can make it a very real, very scary thing. And if there's this idea of the afterlife, that could give characters hope. It could give them despair. It could make them act in ways that normally they wouldn't, that might be against their nature. There are hundreds of thousands of people who have tried to change the way they live because of thinking about some eternal finality. So with the way you craft the afterlife in your game, use it to not only influence the world and build a more interesting world, a more dynamic world, but use it to influence the characters that play at your table and how they interact with your world and how they grow, how they change and shift dynamically. Because at some point, all of those characters will die unless they reach immortality, which in your game, that's a decision for you. But even that decision, if someone has a belief and a understanding, a knowledge, and a trust in some sort of afterlife that they're happy about, I don't know that they would necessarily risk everything for immortality. On the other hand, if someone's afraid of an afterlife that they know is not going to be pleasant, immortality seems like the only choice. I hope you have enjoyed today's show. I hope it wasn't too dark, too dim, and frankly, a heavy subject. But I think the afterlife can be a very interesting and rich environment for building lore in your world, and more specifically, lore that causes characters to act differently. And I think that's the most interesting part of fleshing out your afterlife. I want to thank you for all the support you've given us. We know here at How to Be a Better DM at Session Zero Studios that what we do and kind of how we make our shows, this doesn't happen without you. And so we just want to say thank you. Again, I'm reaching out through the airwaves to give you a big old hug. And I know it's not easy sometimes living with the loss that we all do sometimes. And bringing these elements into a fantasy game can be hard. So if it's too hard, just move on. Don't do it. You don't need to worry about it. But if you have the time, the ability, and the headspace, feel free to flesh out your afterlife and let me know how it goes for you, because I'm sure you will absolutely come up with something much more creative and compelling than I ever could. And I'm just grateful that hopefully I'll be able to enjoy it. This is Justin Lewis signing off from How to Be a Better DM. Just want to say thanks again for listening to our show. We'll be back next week with another handcrafted episode just for you. Until then, let's go ahead and roll initiative. Brought to you by Session Zero Studios. For more information, visit sessionzerostudios.com.